This is the story of Zenith Electronics, the company that watched every single one of its American rivals die and then died last. In 1960, 27 American companies built television sets on American soil. By 1992, that number was 0, and the final name on the list, the last American-owned television maker to switch off its assembly lines, was the one that had spent 70 years telling the country that the quality goes in before the name goes on. This is the autopsy of Zenith Electronics, and through it, the autopsy of an entire American industry. It started on a kitchen table. In 1918, two young ham radio operators in Chicago, Carl Hassel and Ralph Matthews, began building radio equipment for fellow amateurs under the name Chicago Radio Laboratory. Their transmitter used the call sign 9ZN, so they called their radios Zenith. In 1921, a self-made millionaire and Navy lieutenant commander named Eugene F. McDonald joined them, and in 1923 the operation was incorporated as Zenith Radio Corporation. McDonald was a showman, the kind of man who sent shortwave radios to the Arctic with polar expeditions and turned engineering milestones into front-page news. Under him, Zenith racked up firsts at a pace no competitor matched. The world's first portable radio in 1924, the first home radio running on household current in 1926, and push-button tuning in 1927. That same year, the company adopted the slogan that would define it for the rest of the century: the quality goes in before the name goes on. And here's a detail almost nobody knows because the line wasn't even original. Zenith borrowed it from George Bent, a Chicago piano maker who had used it to sell crown pianos back in the 1890s. But Zenith made it true. While dozens of radio companies collapsed in the Depression, Zenith survived on a simple bet, which was to build the best product in the room and charge for it. When television arrived, Zenith didn't just join the industry, it helped invent it. An experimental Zenith TV station was on the air in Chicago in 1939. The first consumer sets came in 1948, and then the innovations started stacking up again. Zenith built the first wireless TV remote control, the Flashmatic, in 1955, and its successor Space Command in 1956, the device that trained an entire planet to change channels from the couch. Zenith also co-invented the FM stereo broadcasting system, the FCC, adopted as the national standard in 1961. In that same era, Zenith and RCA Corporation sat at the top of the American television market as a near duopoly, each holding more than 20%, with 25 smaller companies fighting over the rest. The scale of the operation was staggering. By 1962, Zenith employed around 11,000 people, and at least 6,500 of them were spread across 7 plants on the streets of Chicago. Plant number 1 on West Dickens Avenue alone held 2,500 workers building radios, televisions, and hi-fi phonographs. Zenith's Rowland Corporation subsidiary made picture tubes, and in 1966 it bought a former Keebler cookie factory in Melrose Park, Illinois, and converted it into a color picture tube plant. Remember that building, because it will matter at the end of this story. In 1967, Zenith opened its first plant outside Chicago, a $10 million television assembly complex in Springfield, Missouri, that would grow to more than 1.6 million square feet and turn out 1 million sets a year. Remember that one too. 1965 was the high water mark, and not just for Zenith, but for the whole industry. That year, Americans bought 2.6 million color television sets, and every single one of them was built by an American-owned company in an American plant. Zenith, RCA, Motorola, Admiral Corporation, Philco, Magnavox, Sylvania. It seemed permanent. It lasted less than a decade. Because Zenith's greatest strength was quietly becoming its greatest liability. The company advertised handcrafted quality, and it meant that literally. Zenith was one of the last television manufacturers on Earth to move from hand-wired chassis to printed circuit boards. Hand wiring made a beautiful, repairable, durable television. It also made an expensive one. And across the Pacific, Japanese manufacturers Matsushita Electric, Toshiba, Hitachi, Sharp, Sanyo, and Sony were building sets with automated assembly, relentless process engineering, and prices American firms couldn't touch. But here is where the story stops being a simple tale of complacency, because Zenith's leadership was convinced the game was rigged, and the United States government, at least in part, agreed. In 1971, the U.S. Treasury Department formally found that Japanese manufacturers were dumping television sets, selling them in America below fair value, subsidized by artificially high, cartel-protected prices back home in Japan. The alleged playbook was simple: fix high prices in the protected Japanese market, use the profits to bankroll below-cost exports, and bleed the American industry to death, one competitor at a time. So Zenith made a fateful strategic choice. Instead of racing to automate and offshore like its rivals, it went to war in the courtroom. In 1974, Zenith filed a massive antitrust suit against the Japanese electronics industry, joining an earlier case brought by Emerson Radio Corporation. The litigation dragged on for 12 years through thousands of documents alleging secret rebate schemes, falsified customs declarations, and coordinated price fixing. Zenith fought parallel battles over tariffs and duties, pushing the government to actually collect the anti-dumping penalties on the books. And case by case, it lost. The Supreme Court ruled against Zenith on import duties in 1978. In 1982, the court turned away Zenith's claim over hundreds of millions in uncollected dumping duties. And in March of 1986 came the final blow. In Matsushita Electric Industrial Company versus Zenith Radio Corporation, the Supreme Court sided with the Japanese manufacturers, ruling that Zenith's mountain of evidence wasn't enough to prove a predatory conspiracy. 12 years of litigation, and the last American TV maker walked away with essentially nothing. While the lawyers fought, the industry died around them. Motorola sold its television business to Matsushita in the 70s. Admiral Corporation, once one of the largest television brands in America, exited the business entirely. Magnavox was acquired by Dutch electronics giant Philips, and Sylvania followed it into European hands. And in 1987, when General Electric sold the RCA television business to Thomson SA of France, the unthinkable became official. Zenith was the last American-owned television manufacturer left. The company that had once split the market with RCA now stood completely alone, holding roughly 12% of it and losing money almost every single year. Zenith had already begun its own quiet retreat. As early as 1971, it moved some component production to Matamoros, Mexico and Taiwan, even as its advertising still leaned on American craftsmanship. Through the 80s, more and more of the guts of a Zenith television came from plants in Matamoros, Reynosa, and Ciudad Juarez. By the end of the decade, only final assembly remained on American soil, at that sprawling plant in Springfield, Missouri, which was by then the largest private employer in town, covering an area the size of 29 football fields, which brings us to October 29, 1991. That Tuesday, Zenith's chairman Jerry Perlman announced that the company would move all color television assembly from Springfield to Reynosa, Mexico. The math was brutal and simple. The average wage on the Springfield line was about $7 an hour. In Reynosa, it was $1.60. Roughly 1,500 jobs would disappear, the largest layoff in Springfield's history. Workers who had spent decades on the line were handed the same corporate language that would echo across the Rust Belt for the next 30 years, a necessary consolidation, painful but essential, to reduce costs and improve profitability. When the union contract expired in the spring of 1992 and the line went quiet, something larger than one factory ended. For the first time since television existed, not a single set was assembled in the United States by an American-owned company. An industry that had sold 21 million televisions to Americans in 1991 alone no longer built any of them at home. Zenith, the company, limped on, but the ending was already written. It had one extraordinary card left to play, because its engineers had helped invent digital high-definition television, and Zenith's transmission technology was chosen as the core of America's ATSC digital television broadcast standard. The company that built the first TV remote was, on paper, the company of television's future. But futures cost money, and Zenith had none. In 1991, South Korea's Lucky Gold Star, soon to rebrand as LG Electronics, bought a 5% stake for $15 million. In July of 1995, with losses mounting and no rescue in sight, Zenith agreed to sell control outright. LG paid $350 million for a 57% stake in the last American TV maker. Headlines called it what it was, the end of another American industrial story. Even Korean ownership couldn't stop the bleeding. Zenith lost over $275 million in 1998 alone. That year, it closed its final American factory, the Melrose Park Picture Tube Plant, the converted cookie factory from 1966, and with it, Zenith's Rowland Corporation operations that had built tubes for decades. 80 years of American manufacturing ended in a suburb of the same city where two kids had once soldered radios on a kitchen table. In August of 1999, Zenith filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. LG converted its debt into ownership of the remaining shares, and the existing stockholders were wiped out, their shares canceled, worth nothing. A company that entered the 90s with 32,000 employees worldwide emerged from bankruptcy as a subsidiary with fewer than 7,000, a designer and marketer of electronics that manufactured nothing at all. So what remains today are two answers, one made of brick and one made of paper. On West Dickens Avenue in Chicago, Plant Number 1, the old headquarters where thousands once built the finest televisions in America, stood abandoned for decades, rotting behind broken windows. In 2017, fires tore through the empty complex, and years later the Hulk still stood, an unburied corpse in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And in Lincolnshire, Illinois, the Zenith name lives on as Zenith Electronics LLC, a research and development laboratory owned by LG Electronics. Its engineers work on broadcast standards and digital rights management. That lab helped develop the technologies inside America's digital TV transition and its next-generation broadcast standard. In other words, the ghost of Zenith now does the thinking for the company that bought it. The name that once meant American manufacturing supremacy is today essentially a patent portfolio with a lightning bolt logo. And that is the real autopsy finding. Zenith didn't die because it built bad televisions, because by nearly every account, it built the best ones. It died because it answered an economic war with lawyers instead of factories, because it clung to hand-wired craftsmanship while its rivals automated, and because quality on its own is not a business model when your competitor's price is half yours. 27 American television makers in 1960, 0 by 1992. Admiral, Magnavox, Sylvania, Philco, RCA, every one of them gone for its own reasons, but all of them gone the same way. And Zenith, the best of them, simply went last. The quality went in before the name went on. In the end, the name was the only thing left.